Hi, my name's Nikki. I'm the Obsessive Bookseller, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing a book tag. This is an original by Taylor over at Made Between the Pages. I'll link her original video. I found it so charming. Like, everything about it just sang to my soul. It was so cool. But it's basically talking about the books that shape you as a reader, and it's something that you don't really get to talk about very often. Like, my origin story as a reader is unique from anybody else's, and the chance to share some of the books that were like pivotal moments of change in my life is pretty darn cool. I tagged myself, I let her know I was doing it, and I've got a few things to share. Basically, we're going to start from early childhood all the way up until the most recent years, the books that kind of shaped your life. For me, anyway, as a content creator, books have driven my entire life. When I was 15, they sat me down and said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to own a bookstore." So I enrolled in business classes and got a job at a bookstore. And I think it's the only reason I ended up getting a master's degree is because I started at that point and have long since foregone any ambition at owning a bookstore because retail is not my home. But I built a career with Barnes & Noble because of that, and it's all because of books. And now, what I'm doing now with my spare time, all book driven. So, books have been my life, and yeah, it's going to be really fun to share some of the ones that helped shape that. So, starting out with early childhood, my mom is an avid fantasy reader, and she got me into books pretty early on, and never with any pressure. Like, she was never one of those, "Oh, well, I love books, so you're gonna frickin' love books too." That's me with my kids, but her, she was very passive about it. Like, if you find enjoyment out of it, great. One of my favorites when I was a kid, this is actually the one I had when I was a kid, and my 5-year-old ripped it from the cover, so I had to tape it in. So nothing's sacred to kids. Nothing. But this is the original one that I had when I was a kid, and it's called Just For You, and it's so freaking cute. I love the original artwork of these initial little critters. They do not maintain the same quality as he continues to write in the series. Like, the first 10 or so are golden, and then from there, the artwork is nowhere near as detailed or beautiful. If you've read any of these early ones, you'll know there's always a spider and a grasshopper. Yeah, a little grasshopper and a spider hidden in every page. And that's the kind of stuff that really engages kids. As I've been reading with my own kids, I've realized that if you can get them to engage with the page and find the spider, they are so much more entertained. And I love having this one to share with my kids. Although, since the cover tearing incident of 2020, we have since bought him a different copy. It's mine, you can't wreck it. Another classic favorite, it's called It's Bedtime. And like I said, kids are not very careful with their books. They don't have any need to be, but as you can see, at some point I went in with a marker, and there are several pages where the characters are outlined with that. And it's a good reminder to me that these books don't have to be treated perfectly to have a lot of meaning, and they're still special. And we have read this one to death with me and my little kids. Like, they love this book. It's just a cute little, get ready for bed. It's short. I don't mind reading my kids long books, but there are some nights where a little short one is like what the doctor ordered. But yes, I loved this one. And then one that I can actually remember my mom reading to me when I was 4 years old. It's called Are There Hippos on the Farm? Like that old brown packing tape that she had to repair it with because it was so well loved. And I admit, I try not to let my kids handle this one too much, but they'll go through and are there bunnies on the farm? Are there goats on the farm? But are there hippos on the farm? Oh no! I remember my mom doing that in that voice, and so yeah, you can't even get a hold of this one anymore. Mine, it's completely falling apart, but yeah, very cherished. So yes, those are 3 of my childhood favorites that I still have. The next section is early elementary, and this is when I was starting to read my own books. I remember really enjoying story time. The teachers would read the books and then flip it around and show everybody the pages, and We read like Roald Dahl's The BFG, and they were really into Eric Carle books at the time. And in fact, one of them that I remembered loving is The Mixed Up Chameleon. And I think Eric Carle's books were a part of the curriculum because I have a lot of old school assignments where we had to recreate some of the pictures in the books, and so they were really heavily promoting these. What I loved most about this one was the rainbow aspect. So as he becomes other things, the creatures in the sideline here create a rainbow. And at the end, it's so beautiful. I remember sitting in the library in my elementary school reading this book to myself. I would always go to it. I thought it was so cool. Anything with animals was a big draw for me. So I love that one. My kid loves it quite a bit as well. And this one, Are You My Mother? My all-time favorite kids book until I had kids of my own. So I loved reading this one. I thought it was so cool, and then each book is a progression. So like, you're not a cat or a dog. You're not a cat or a dog or a cow. And it keeps going on. And I find that repetitive, like green eggs and ham type of building on itself where you've got to repeat yourself over and over again drives me absolutely bonkers. So this was my favorite book when I was young, and it is the one I like reading least to my children, which is so funny to me. I've thought about unhauling it. This is not the one I had when I was a kid. I bought it when I was first pregnant with my son, and I think I might keep it because when he starts reading himself, that repetitive nature is actually what helps you retain the words and learn. But yeah, I do not keep this where I keep the bedtime stories because I don't want to frickin' read it again. But I loved it when I was a kid. Isn't that funny? All the grand plans of the books you're going to love, we love none of the ones that I loved when I was a kid as much as we love the ones I have now. So being shaped as a young reader, a lot of the stuff they did in schools actually did help develop me as a reader. They had these reading segments where for an hour, I think every day or every couple days a week, you would go into a different classroom with a reading group and you would take turns reading aloud stories. And one of them that they picked was The Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop. Surprisingly, this was in 5th grade. I was 10 years old. I really hadn't read anything with like a fantasy where you could get transported to another world. And through another world in your own house, like this castle that takes into this other realm, I was completely enamored. And I asked my mom to get me the second book, and it's the first time I can remember staying up late with a flashlight under the blankets trying to finish a book, and it was just so cool. Sparked the love of books as I have today. And so I'm really grateful for this series, and I'm really grateful for the school for encouraging reading and loving stuff like this. Because this is the kind of crap they want to read. They don't want to read historical fiction, usually. And then those awesome Scholastic book fairs featured the Animorph books, and I fell in love. Anything to do with animals and like a little bit of magic and technology, being able to change into animals. Oh man, I was the Animorph girl for my entire middle school career. I always had one of these going. There were summer days where I sat home and read 3 of them in one day, and I've read them so many times. I love them so much, and I credit these for sparking my continued love of reading. Even to this day, I reread them on occasion. I read them to my brother when he was younger. Totally gonna read them to my kids. Yeah, love it. And then this may seem like an odd one for elementary because it's, full-length novel. But I love animals. I saw this in the library, and I thought, I am not a good enough reader to tackle something that size yet, but I want to read this book so much. And so it motivated me to get better at reading. And eventually, I think about when I was 12 or 13, I finally felt like I was able to give it a try. So I picked it up and eventually ended up reading the whole Redwall series. But it's so cool to me that this one book sitting on a shelf in a library motivated me to read more. And to this day, it's still one of my favorites of the series. And I'm so excited that I worked that hard at something to get good enough to read a full-length novel at that age. And I'm sure this is not a surprise to anybody, but Harry Potter was an integral part to my childhood. I was 11 when the book came out, which is so cool to me because I felt like I grew up with Harry. My aunt worked at the library, and she read this when it very first came in and then gave it to my mom to read, and then she then gave it to me. And for the first like 3 or 4 years of Harry Potter fandom, it was just me in this tiny little town where nobody else had read it. And then slowly, by about book 3, other people started talking about it. I had reread them so many times by then, my copies were just absolutely trashed. I remember having a surreal moment at working the release party at a bookstore for the release of the final book in the series, and how many people we had lined up to get a copy of the final Harry Potter book. And I just remember sitting in my bed reading this one. I read it in a single day when I was 11 years old. Wow. So Harry Potter means a lot of things to a lot of people these days. I won't spend any more time on it, but I really love my experience with it. And then we get into the high school years. I had read to death all of the Animorphs and Redwall books, and now I was interested in something a little more sophisticated. Started looking at my mom's bookshelves a little more, and her favorite novel, the one that got her interested in fantasy in the first place, is Magician Apprentice by Raymond E. Feist. And this is just the cover, because our copy was so well read and damaged that it is long since been recycled, but I saved the cover because I'm nostalgic like that. But this one got me into fantasy as well. And even on the rereads, I had a hard time with the second book, Magician Master. I found it really slow and boring. So I had to pick it up again a few years later, but finally did and ended up continuing the series. And Silverthorn is awesome. So if you've only read Magician, try Silverthorn. And then if you're done with the series after that, good on you, but you've got to make it until at least then, because Magician Master is not his strongest work. But Daughter of the Empire quite possibly might be. I've mentioned this before, so I won't go into it too much, but I canceled plans with friends during the summer who were going to a lake because I wanted to stay home and finish reading this book. And back then, I read casually, but I didn't cancel plans typically to read. I mean, it was just something I did when I had nothing else going on, no other video games to play. Reading was very casual, and so the fact that I was willing to forego other things to finish this shows you how engaged I was with it. I loved it so much. So when I was in the 9th grade, I moved, and was very shy, very quiet, soft-spoken, coming from an old hick town where everybody talked really slowly. So coming to a bigger city where people talk so fast, and I was so nervous that I couldn't understand what they were saying half the time. It was so bizarre. A little bit of culture shock, to be honest. But I always carried a book with me. And so a lot of people were able to start conversations with me because I was the girl who always had a book. And if it looked interesting, they asked me about it. And that was kind of fun. And actually thinking it through most of my grade school, I was one of the few who always had a book with me, and it's one of those things where I can't leave home without it, because what if there's time to read? I kind of appreciate that about my younger self. I made a friend who also loved reading fantasy, and he got me excited about the Forgotten Realms series by R.A. Salvatore. Drizzt. He talked about Drizzt all the time. This was his favorite series. He was very slowly reading the most recent book out at the time because he didn't want to get through it too fast, and so he said, you have to read these. And I read them, and I absolutely loved them. It got me interested in more combat-heavy novels. I mean, this isn't that heavy, but at the time, it was more about dwarves and elves and dragons, and not so much about the hand-to-hand combat. And I thought the world building and the concept and everything was so cool. I've since reread this trilogy a few times and like it even better each time I go through it. But I'm really grateful for this one. And then the Dragonlance Chronicles, because you can't read Forgotten Realms without at least hearing about Dragonlance. They're very similar in that regard. Companions of the Hall or whatever on a quest and gotta battle the orcs and the demons and whatnot. It has been so long since I read these, but I remember them fondly as pretty safe for young readers to get into. There's a couple of adult concepts, but it's very accessible to young readers, especially ones who want to get into the fantasy stuff, So when my kid is about 13, that's about okay age range for me to start introducing them to these type of books if they're interested. Now, the next section is college years, and I read so many books in college. I was so busy that it was nice to have. There's a gnat flying around. Oh, I caught him! But I let him go. Little shit. Anyway. So in college, I was reading more of the same stuff that I was reading in high school, but I don't really remember a pivotal moment of something that just kind of like rocked my world. So instead of going to college age years, I'm going to up that a little bit to like mid-20s. And that is when I was inspired to start my blog. Now, a couple of factors led to that. One of them, a writing mentor told me that if I wanted to become a writer, I needed a platform. And so I'd already been thinking about doing a blog, but that kind of gave me the push I needed. And I had just read Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb in 2012, and it was so profound. It affected me so much. A book has never made me feel the way that this book made me feel, and I was so affected by it that I needed to tell someone. Nobody was reading the stuff that I was reading at the time. Like, I needed to talk about this book, and I didn't have anybody to talk with. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put it online, and maybe people will talk to me there. And from this one experience spawned all of these years, 10 years worth of content creation, and now like culminating in this booktube experience that I'm having. And I am so grateful for this book on more levels than just what it did for my life, but because I absolutely love it. So thank you, Robin Hobb. And this is kind of a weird one, but there was a time in blogging where everybody that I started blogging with after 2 or 3 years I noticed weren't blogging anymore. And like to this day, everybody that I started with, I think I'm the only one in that community who is still actively blogging on a regular basis. It can get a little daunting and a little tiresome to be constantly working on creating content. Now, I have meaning to this whole process beyond just content creation. Like, this is one of my favorite forms of creativity and expression. So I've got a lot of extra motivation as opposed to, just trying to build a following or whatever, which would be cool too. But anyway, so about the point where I thought, is this even worth doing? Is this worth all of the time and energy when like a few dozen people are reading my stuff and I've been doing it for so many years? I reviewed Game Board of the Gods by Rochelle Mead, and she tweeted my review of that, and my page stats just skyrocketed. I mean, we're talking like 10 views a day to several thousand views a day for months. I mean, I think the effects of this lasted several years. And then what it did for me was give me hope that if I just kept working hard enough, sometimes you will catch a break, All that hard work, sometimes you will get the atta girl that you need to keep going, and this was one of those cases for me. If I was on the cusp of maybe not blogging anymore, this book helped reinvigorate that passion, and I'm so grateful for it. And now, even to this day, I haven't gotten any recognition on quite the same scale as this, but that's okay because I know eventually something cool like this will happen again. Which isn't saying I haven't had a lot of cool author interactions or publisher interactions. No, I'm talking strictly from a numbers perspective. So those are the books that shaped my 20s, and now I'm into my 30s. The next category is books that are shaping my life now, books that are driving me as a reader now. And I have 3. I had 4. One of them was going to be Robin Hobb, but I already mentioned her, but her works are the reason that I love reading, and she is forever on a pedestal. But I didn't actually finish reading all of her stuff in my 30s. I read them all in my 20s. So, here are the books that are driving me now. The Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. It's really funny to me because I've seen a lot of negative feedback on this series, and it's one of the few that I thought, oh, how can people not like this book? How can people not like this series? It is just baffling to me that they aren't liking this series as much as I did. I love dry humor, and that is abundant in here. So even if nothing else is working, if you can make me laugh, I'm around for quite a bit longer. And for me, it's especially evident in the second trilogy. This author is amazing at creating deep connections between characters and that bond that I feel as a reader, more so than almost any that I've read. And I love the sense of adventure in his stories. I love the politics. I love everything about this series. So this has been one over the last 5 years that has really fired me up as a reader. Another one being the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Rich, immersive world building and storytelling on a scope that we haven't seen a lot before, and non-human characters, and so many things about this world and this story that, I mean, I feel like we've only even just scratched the surface of what it has to offer. And I personally view this as the mark of the next evolution of fantasy. Writers like Eilington and even McClellan and Robert Jackson Bennett, like all of these authors, I feel like are springing from the ideas and content that is in this work in particular. This series is so special to me, and I've reread it several times and have never gotten bored in anything. I mean, they're 1,000+ page books, and I've read it several times, and you know me with my strict TBR and all these things I have to read. Like, I have no problem taking 2 months and rereading 2 books in this series to get prepared for the next one. I'll probably be doing it at the end of the year, at least reading Rhythm of War again. Or maybe next year. Yeah, we're a year out. Anyway, the way this story makes me feel, the way I feel completely immersed in this world, is why I read. And I'm really grateful for this one. And then finally, my favorite series to recommend, The Draconius Memoria by Anthony Ryan. It's got dragons, it's got a cool magic system, it's got steampunk elements, flintlock elements, great characters, incredible adventure, and discoveries of places that just trigger your sense of awe and wonder and make you feel like, yeah, this is why I read. This is so freaking cool. I love this series. It's my favorite one to recommend. I figure out of all of them that I love, it has the most mass appeal, and it is by far my favorite dragon book. I try to read all the dragon books. I love dragons so much, and these are my favorites. The way it is done in here, they are my favorites. I prefer it when dragons are bestial and they don't think like humans. I'm having a hard time lately with some of the dragons in books where they're basically just large humans with our same mannerisms and thoughts or whatever. No, these are animals first, and they don't give one whit about us. It's kind of like a dominant, like a play for dominance over the land or whatever, like who's gonna win, that kind of thing. I love this series, and I'm including it because it has shaped my ability to recommend to a mass audience. I think one of my main goals of everything that I do is to be able to recommend books to people. And when I can get as fired up as I get about this book when I talk about it, it's that kind of like infectious, that's not a word you want to use these days, but that kind of like infectious enthusiasm that reminds me why I love books and reminds me of why I love talking about books. So that's my book canon. I really enjoyed taking you through all of that. Thank you so much for watching the video. I don't tag people officially because I feel like it involves kind of a weird pressure where, like, well, okay, I tag this person, but now they're going to feel like weirdly obligated, and what if it doesn't work in with their schedule? What if they don't want to be tagged by it? And what if we're not on that, like, kind of relationship? Like, I overthink these things quite a bit. Like, we don't have the kind of relationship where tagging me and putting me up for this obligation is okay. So I'm going to just avoid all of the awkwardness that I do, that I, like, manifest when stuff like this comes along, like social faux pas, and just say anybody who is interested in doing this tag is welcome to, and just let me know. Please link back to the original Taylor at Made Between the Pages for it. And for everybody watching who doesn't have a BookTube channel, I would love some of your canon answers in the comments. Like, let me know what books drove you as a reader. I think it's, like, it's not something you get to tell on a resume. It's not something that, like, when you're at a party, someone's like, oh, what kind of books did you love as a kid? No, it's mostly those things where you end up talking about them, even though people don't want to hear about them. So I'm taking this self-indulgent video and running with it, and I had a lot of fun with it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.